Howdy folks, hope you all had a great weekend and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. And I'm very happy to say that this episode of Mingles with Jingles has got itself a sponsor. Hopefully you're all aware by now that I don't accept sponsorships unless it's from a company or a product that I either use myself or am entirely happy to recommend to you, or both, and that is the case with today's sponsor, Incogni. Now, I'm sure you're all aware that every time you go on the internet, your personal data is being harvested by data brokers and sold on to, well, basically anybody who will pay for it. Usually, things like insurance companies or credit companies, making it harder for you to get credit and raising your insurance premiums without you even knowing anything about it. It's also possible that you may be aware that under most legal jurisdictions, you're entitled to go after these data brokers and demand that they remove any information about you that they hold on file. Now that's fine in theory, but it's a lot harder in practice because, well, do you even know who these data brokers are? I mean, I didn't, but they knew who I was. And that's where Incogni comes in, because Incogni does all of the hard work for you. Incogni goes after the data brokers, submitting demands that they remove any data that they hold on file for you, and I'm actually pretty good about taking care of my online data. So when I signed up for Incogni's service, I wasn't particularly surprised to find that 69 data brokers that Incogni went after didn't actually hold any data on me, but a further 26 did. And Incogni not only got them to remove any of my personal data, they also slapped them with a suppression order to ensure that they couldn't accidentally re-add me back to their lists in the future, and they keep checking up on them to ensure that they comply with these legal requirements because, oh, would you look at that, sometimes some of them don't. So head over to incogni.com/jingles and use code JINGLES to get an exclusive offer of 60% off. That's incogni.com/jingles and use code JINGLES, or just click the link below to take your personal data off the market. I got the feeling that this week was going to be a slow news week as far as gaming news was concerned when I logged into the PC Gamer website and had a look at the headline news article, which reads, and I ain't making this up, Monster Hunter Wilds announced for 2025, and it looks like a follow-up to Monster Hunter World. No shit, Sherlock. Wow. You've got to be desperate for a headline if your headline basically says, sequel to a game is a sequel. I thought, well, maybe it's just a badly worded headline. Let me have a look. No, that's basically it. Sequel is a sequel. That's the current headline. As I'm sitting here recording this episode of Mingles with Jingles, that is the current headline news on the PC Gamer News website. Wow. Surely something interesting happened this week. So I'm scrolling through the news and I see another headline that, I mean, it's pure clickbait, but it kind of piqued my interest anyway. I mean, that's the purpose of a headline anyway. It's there to make you click and read, and this one absolutely worked. It says, and as headlines go, it is a bit of a mouthful, but here it is in full. Creator behind hugely popular Skyrim co-op mod gives up on the Starfield version of it because, drumroll please, this game is effing trash. Well, there's got to be a story there. And there is. Although I did take issue with the starting paragraph where it says, Bethesda's much anticipated Starfield, the first new series from the studio in decades. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that part's true. Fallout goes back decades, as does Skyrim, which is technically part of the Elder Scrolls series, so yeah, fair enough. But then it says it's its first single-player role-playing game since 2011's remarkable Skyrim. What? Is Fallout 4 a joke to you or something? It came out 4 years after Skyrim, and it's very definitely a single-player RPG. Although while it is technically true to say that Fallout 4 came out 4 years after Skyrim, you have to stop and ask yourself the question exactly which version of Skyrim, because, I mean, it's not just... I think it's officially the most modded game in history, but I'm not even sure how many different versions of it have been released. I tried to Google it. You can't get a straight answer. Some sources say there have been 5 different versions, some sources say there have been 7, some as much as 9. Honestly, I was quite surprised to hear that even the highest estimate was as low as 9. I thought there'd been more versions of Skyrim than that. but it has unquestionably been the most modded game in history. The Nexus Mods website is currently hosting slightly less than 130,000, not 130, 130,000 different mods across Skyrim and its Special Edition. There are still people playing Skyrim and its Special Edition. I mean, Bethesda are still earning money off the back of Skyrim. 12 years after the game was released, it came out in 2011, and they're mostly playing it with mods, of course, and one of the most popular mods for it is kind of the subject of this story. It's called Skyrim Together, and the reason for its popularity is that it addresses probably the biggest issue that people had with Skyrim. The fact that it was a single-player role-playing game, and Skyrim Together basically redoes the game so that you can play it in co-op. And not just any old co-op, by the way. I mean, I thought, oh yeah, playing through the story of Skyrim with a friend, that sounds like fun. No, it doesn't just let you play in co-op with one other person. It lets you play in co-op with up to 30 people. I mean, it's a massive, massive mod. The definitive version, which is called Skyrim Together Reborn, has over 1 million downloads, and it's so big that other people, other mod makers, make mods for this mod. So one of the coders of this mod decided that they were going to do the same thing for Starfield. I quote, "When the game was released, I was hyped, like a lot of people, but probably for different reasons. I spent launch day and a few days after reverse engineering the game and porting over gameplay hooks from Skyrim Together to a potential Starfield Together mod. I ported about 70% of Skyrim Together reversed code to Starfield Together. There was just one problem. This game is trash." He then went on to say, "I won't be continuing development on Starfield Together. I'm not going to put my heart and soul into a mod for a game as mediocre as this." I mean, this puts me into an awkward situation. I'm sitting here now in the situation of having to feel sorry for Bethesda and Todd Howard. I never thought this day would ever come. Because Starfield has been getting a lot of flack. People have basically been complaining, oh, where's all the new features? There's nothing new in this game. It's just the same as Fallout 4. It's just the same as Skyrim, except in space. And, well, yeah. But that's kind of the point. People have very short memories. Does anybody remember Fallout 76? I mean, on the one hand, people are definitely drawing valid criticisms of Starfield here. I can't really argue with that. But at the same time, you're basically complaining that Bethesda are giving you exactly what you want. You see, the thing about Bethesda games, and specifically we're talking here about the Skyrim series and the Fallout series, is they've never been the most polished games in the world. The Elder Scrolls and the Fallout series from Bethesda have always pretty much been a giant collection of bugs held together by great characters, great story and great world building. And thanks to the great characters, the great story and the great world building, people were prepared to overlook and forgive the bugs. Which, of course, was why Fallout 76 was such a massive dumpster fire. This was the last and possibly first time Bethesda actually tried to do something new. They thought, wouldn't it be a great idea to do Fallout but multiplayer? And that, in and of itself, wasn't a terrible idea. Kudos to them for at least trying something new. Unfortunately, the multiplayer barely worked. And they didn't bother to do any story, any characters, or any world building. So all you had left was multiplayer that sort of worked some of the time, and the bugs. And, understandably, there was quite some backlash about it. And it wasn't just the game that sucked. I mean, literally everything that Fallout 76 touched turned to shit. On release, you couldn't get the game anywhere other than through the Bethesda launcher. You couldn't get it on Steam, you couldn't get it on the Epic Games Store, places that had a refund policy. So they automatically denied refunds and then were forced to backtrack on that. They put up a website where anybody who wasn't happy with the game was able to claim a refund. The problem was if you registered your details on that website, you were basically doxing yourself because there was no security on it and anybody could log into that website and get your details. The special editions, the more expensive versions of the game that came with real-life goodies, like the Fallout 76 canvas bag, that when people got it wasn't canvas, barely qualified as a bag, was made out of some cheap tatty nylon. And when people started demanding the actual canvas bag that they'd been promised and had paid for, in order to keep them happy, while Bethesda furiously tried to get an actual, the actual thing that they'd advertised, made and shipped out to people. They were compensated with some cash from the Atom Store, the in-game shop, which of course worked perfectly. None of the rest of the game did, but the in-game shop did. And ironically, the amount of in-game currency they'd been compensated with wasn't enough to buy an in-game bag. And then there was the Power Armor helmet that came with, I think, the Ultimate Edition of the game, that cost something like $200. You got this plastic Power Armor helmet, and within weeks of taking it out of the box, it started going mouldy and posed a health hazard. Then, in another desperate attempt to cash in with some merchandising, they started taking pre-orders for Nuka Dark Rum, which was like a play on the Nuka-Cola drinks in the Fallout series. And it was basically spiced dark rum presented in this beautiful dark Nuka-Cola bottle. Except when it eventually arrived, because of course it kept missing the release date, the bottle was anything but. Instead, it was just a bottle of rum inside this cheap plastic Nuka-Cola bottle shell. So, yeah, everybody started demanding the money back from that one as well. Fallout 76 was the game where Bethesda tried to do something new, and it backfired. I mean, it was entirely their own fault, of course. I mean, who the hell at Bethesda, Todd Howard, I'm looking at you here, thought the only reason people play our games, the only reason people tolerate all of the bugs that our games ship with, all of the lack of polish that our games ship with, is the great characters, the great story, and the great world building. So let's do none of that. And what could possibly go wrong? So, I mean, I have no sympathy whatsoever for Bethesda or Todd Howard where Fallout 76 is concerned. The backlash was immense, and they totally deserved it. But the thing is, they took that criticism on board. As far as Starfield was concerned, they played it very, very safe with Starfield. They basically didn't try anything new. They gave people exactly what they wanted and expected from a Bethesda game. Great characters, great story, great world building, and they polished the shit out of it. I'm not saying Starfield was bug-free, but I didn't encounter any, which is highly unusual for a Bethesda title. And now they're getting shit for that. They're getting shit because they didn't try anything new with Starfield. It's like Bethesda are screwed if they do, and they're screwed if they don't. I think part of the problem is that everybody expected so much more. And I don't know why. I mean, how short are people's memories here? This is the studio that brought you Fallout 76. The fact that they've produced a working game that basically does exactly what it says it's going to do, and does it in a largely bug-free and well-polished way, you'd think would be enough, but no. I also think part of the problem is that it came out in the same year as Baldur's Gate 3. Now, Baldur's Gate 3 is a groundbreakingly good game in the way that Starfield isn't. Starfield's just more of the same with a science fiction skin over the top. But that's basically what people wanted and expected from Bethesda. Baldur's Gate 3, on the other hand, you see, I've played other Larian Studios games. The Divinity series, every bit as good as Baldur's Gate 3. And it did well, but it didn't do hugely well. And I think the reason for that is probably to do with the IP, the intellectual property, because aside from people who played the original game, when Divinity Original Sin 2 came out, nobody had heard of it. And it's difficult to get sales off the ground if you're starting from scratch with a new intellectual property. Does anybody remember the game Fractured Space? I know some of you will, although most probably won't. So for the benefit of those who haven't heard of it, because the game has been defunct for a couple of years now, imagine sort of kind of League of Legends style lane domination, except in space, with big starships. Team-based, fighting each other, so on and so on. Great game. Really, really good game. But they had no advertising budget. They were relying on word of mouth and, well, you know, people like me to spread the word. And it managed to struggle along for about 2 years before they finally had to shut the servers down. Now, imagine that same game, that same concept, but with the Battlestar Galactica license. Or the Star Wars license. The game would basically have sold itself. So when you're trying to launch a new IP like this, especially when you're an indie developer and you basically have a micro budget as far as your advertising is concerned, it's very, very difficult to get the game off the ground. Now, Larian isn't. I mean, technically, I suppose they are an independent developer, but they're not small. But at the same time, the fact that they did get the brand recognition for this new game from the Baldur's Gate license, which quite a few people probably hadn't heard of, but if you're a gamer of a certain age, the brand recognition from the Baldur's Gate series is huge. Possibly, arguably, certainly in my opinion at least, the greatest series of role-playing games ever written. Baldur's Gate, Tales of the Sword Coast, Baldur's Gate 2, Shadows of Arm. Amazingly good games. And it was a really smart move from Larian to be able to get that intellectual property and do the third game in the series. And if that's what it takes, if getting that brand recognition from Baldur's Gate name is what it takes to get more people playing Larian Studios games, I have no problem with that whatsoever, because their games deserve to be played. And unfortunately for Bethesda, Starfield came out in the same launch window as Baldur's Gate 3. And regardless of how much polish, and they did put a lot of effort into trying to ensure that Starfield was the least buggy of any Bethesda title released in the last 20 years, it was never, ever going to stand up to comparison to Baldur's Gate 3 from a studio like Larian. So here I am, feeling sorry for Todd Howard and Bethesda. Makes me feel really uncomfortable. Because I've actually quite enjoyed myself shitting on Bethesda for the best part of the last 5 years since the release of Fallout 76. Because they deserve to be shit upon. But they really don't deserve it for Starfield. I mean, you can't really blame them for giving people exactly what they've been asking for ever since the release of Fallout 76. Because that's pretty much exactly what they've done. But now they're getting shit for that as well. So I'm sitting here in the extremely uncomfortable situation of having to feel sorry for Todd Howard and Bethesda. And I do not like the way that makes me feel. Anyway, on that extremely uncomfortable bombshell, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. Next week's episode will be the last Mingles with Jingles of 2023, by the way. I will be taking my Christmas break. Oh, let's have a quick look at the calendar. Next week, Monday is the 18th. Yeah, that'll be it. That will be the last video. Well, I say it'll be the last video of the year, but you know what I'm like at taking time off. I'm just as bad at that as I am at everything else that I do. But officially, the last video of the year will be on the 18th of December. And I'll be back in the saddle officially on Tuesday, the 2nd of January. So that's my official 2 weeks off per year. But we all know there's going to be some videos going up over that 2 week period, regardless of whether I'm supposed to be taking it easy or not, because I just get bored and I like making videos. So anyway, yeah, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you've all had a great weekend. I hope you've enjoyed the video. And as always, take care. And I'll catch you next time.